Why are there no orcs in Dragonlance? Well, who's to say there's no orcs in Dragonlance? Dragonlance is Dragonlance, but this is the new edition of D&D. It's interesting to jump into that, looking at the kind of the DNA, the genesis of Dragonlance. And being a longtime Dragonlance enthusiast, one of my proudest moments that, I'm proud of it. It's a major gaming achievement. I passed the test at the Tower of High Sorcery. Dragonlance back in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons was a really interesting world to play in with a lot of narrative, a lot of neat innovations. And it's been interesting to have had the chance to play through that through the years. I'm excited now to see Dragonlance in its current incarnation and to be able to explore and bounce around the two and maybe even play some of those older modules. So it's just a win across the board. But new players or players that kind of are looking at the re-imaged Lance, you're wondering, like, where are the orcs? What's going on? And my take on that is interesting. Playing Dragonlance, I never really noticed that they were missing. Can we call it classic Dragonlance? I mean, what do we even call it? Dragonlance back in the day. AD&D Dragonlance. No one ever really noticed because at that time, Dungeons & Dragons Red Box and Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, like, orcs were everywhere, right? They were just kind of the low-level beaters. You beat on them. You got some experience. That's not to say they weren't tough in AD&D. A group of orcs could easily overpower a party, 4 or 5 adventurers, level 1 to 3. You had to be careful. You did. They were kind of on parity with the players. They're not like orcs and goblins of today, which are just kind of like stat blocks you chew through to get enough experience to hit level 3 or 4. Orcs had some bite, and if you ran a war boss or you put in a shaman, things changed even a little bit more with some cleric magic. But they were absolutely everywhere. If you bought a stock level 1 to 3 module, you're like, bro, 80% is like orcs everywhere. I get it. The game is set up to kind of feed them to you. Dragonlance was interesting in that there were no orcs. There were no half-orcs. They didn't exist. I think there was a little bit in the lore, kind of in the barbarian lands, kind of mentioning them, but in the civilized lands and the known lands, no, not really. Now, that was, of course, replaced with various dragon lore, and the draconians and goblins and hobgoblins were kind of the shock troops and the low-level experience fodder until the DM sprang other things on you. But we didn't really notice, and it was kind of a fun break. It was kind of an interesting break to not have that type of monster, which was in everything in D&D. So jumping forward to today, kind of keeping that idea, how well are orcs integrated into the current edition of Dungeons & Dragons? Now, I can only speak from the modules and the play group that I participate in as opposed to the overall meta. Again, orcs are kind of everywhere. They're low-level stat blocks. They're not really that powerful. They're not really that much of a threat. I mean, no more than the lower-level challenge rating monsters anyway. But having them or not having them in Dragonlance, I see that, quite frankly, as completely adjustable. The current edition of D&D, I view as a suggestion. The prepackaged modules, the prepackaged campaigns are fantastic. They set that narrative, but orcs have kind of been re-imaged, both half-orcs and straight-up orcs, to contribute more to the D&D universe. So I would kind of see it as they might not be in the game, in Dragonlance, but they're part of the D&D universe. You could easily bring them in. You could easily integrate them. You could easily play them with no adjustment. And certainly if one of my players wanted to play an orc character or an half-orc character, we would work that in, and that would have some awesome role-playing moments. So I kind of view the newer implementations. We saw this with Curse. I view them as this is kind of the stock world, the suggested world. You're going to pull in stuff from the monster manuals. You're going to pull stuff in and add to it or change it. And if you want to do that, it completely integrates perfectly fine. So no orcs in Dragonlance? Well, yes and no. I think, as always, it depends on where you want to go and what you want to play.